as I was saying before, this is really a topic that's dear to my heart, something that's very a common theme in my life, which probably means I struggle with it. You'll see in this talk. So there's a beautiful Buddhist saying that says, learn to let go. That is the key to happiness. Ron's there with big eyes. That's interesting. So this is something that I've experienced in my life many, many times, over and over again. So I have this deep knowing that this is the truth, that as I let go, I will find peace and serenity and happiness. The problem is I forget that over and over again. I spend lots of time worrying about the future, regretting past mistakes, desiring things I don't have, wishing for certain outcomes, or that things, being attached to things being a certain way, or thinking things should have been a certain way, or ought to be a certain way. Even as I recognize that this is the source of the majority of the suffering that I create for myself in my life, if not all of it. So at least I'm becoming aware, as I am doing all of this, that I am doing it. So that's a step in the right direction. So recently I had an experience that really exemplified this in a very heightened way, maybe more than any other time in my life. So as some of you know, I just released a new CD and had a big CD celebration in Lawrence, Kansas. So I intentionally chose a venue that was larger and more prestigious than any venue I had been in before, because I am working on expanding, trying to put myself out there in the world and really step up and ask the universe to meet me. So that was my intention. The room seats 150 people, which would have been by far the largest audience I've ever had for a solo show. I've played for bigger audiences, but not for a solo show. So I worked towards this goal all year. I started with an Indiegogo campaign that I'd never done before. That's a crowdfunding campaign, which is its own effort. It takes many months of preparation and a lot of time and energy to make it happen. And then, of course, I needed to finish my CD and all that meant, including, the recording, the packaging, et cetera, et cetera. That's a project of many months as well. And many, many hours of publicity and practicing. So I've been working towards this for weeks and weeks, really months and months, all year long towards this performance. So it meant a lot of expanding, trying new things, which of course comes with a lot of challenges. So it had been a trying year in that it took a lot of energy, both physical and emotional. Each time we try something new, generally speaking, if you're like me, it means it creates a little bit of anxiety and stepping into something that's different. So I had worked really, really hard for this performance. But the day of the show, we had only sold 25 advance tickets. I'd hired someone to help me with publicity. I'd worked on it myself, and still we'd only sold 25 tickets. I had 12 comps, so I figured, okay, maybe 10 other people will show up, and so maybe the room will have 50 or 60 people in it. But it's hard to perform in a room that is full of a lot of empty chairs. If any of you have are a speaker or any kind of performer, it's really difficult to get the energy up and to have a good performance. It's not really just about the person, it's about what's going on with the audience. I have found that to be really true in terms of how well I do, and I've heard that from many other artists. So I was quite anxious, really, about how it was all going to go. To make matters worse, a lot of my usual supporters were out of town. It was August 15th, so kind of a lot of people, I guess, their last hurrah before the fall semester. And then the few days before the show, I kept getting calls and texts and email messages from people who had said they were going to be coming for many weeks, who were saying, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it after all. So all of that was, entering into my being, and my ego was having a heyday. So I was full of all kinds of negative thinking, which I knew was ego-driven, but such as, no one's going to come, nobody loves me, my music is not good enough, I'm not worthy of performing at the Lead Center, etc., etc. I'm going to look like a fool for, doing it at this place and nobody is there. All those things that I'm sure most of us have. Does anybody else have that kind of thought ever? Right? No matter how far we get in our career, no matter what kind of success we have, we still have these times of negativity and doubt. So what was interesting to me, though, is that during those times, during the couple of weeks before and then the few days before and the day of, that I was stressing out and having all of these thoughts, I knew that it was my ego being very active. And that the best thing to do would be to let it all go, to turn everything over, to let go of all of my worry, to know that I had no control over the outcome, and just to let it all go and turn it over to my higher power. I knew that that is where I would find serenity, and I knew that that's where I would give my best performance. But even though I knew it, I wasn't doing such a great job. But I was grateful to see myself doing that, and I did find some kind of humor in being aware of what was going on within me. And then, of course, I was thinking, oh my gosh, and now all my negative thinking is going to create what I'm thinking. So then I was being anxious about that. So I was trying to also figure out why I was so much more nervous about this particular show than I was about other shows. And I think it was a combination of a lot of things. It was, I'd selected this venue, so it was kind of like I had placed additional pressure on myself. And I really love the music that I do, and I really do believe in it. And so I wanted it to be successful. I think we all want that for the things that we work. I've never worked so hard for one individual show. And I wanted it to be full of people who I could then offer this music to. I wanted to do it, yes, for personal and financial gain. I needed to live, and I was trying to find a way, to make this work as an individual artist. I wanted my friends to be there. I wanted to feel the love. And I was just finding myself being very attached to those things. But I also knew that it was all my ego. And that I would find this contentment and peace I was talking about if I could let it go. And in fact, that has been my practice as a performer in a very intentional kind of way. Before every performance, I always say a prayer saying, let me be the vessel. This is not about me. Let my ego go away and let me just be an instrument of God's grace and peace. And most of the time that has worked. But for whatever reason, that particular day, I wasn't doing a very good job of it. I just was very attached to certain results. So interestingly, I had decided to reread the Bhagavad Gita, this beautiful sacred Indian text, during this time, before my meditation practice. And the central lesson in this beautiful text is letting go of selfish attachments, and specifically to the results of our labor. So I also found this quite ironic that I'm reading this during this time. And I want to read this passage. This is from my favorite translation of the Bhagavad Gita, which is Eknath Iswaran's Bhagavad Gita. If any of you don't know it, it's really beautifully translated. And he has a wonderful introduction where he really explains very well the philosophical precepts of the Gita and the setting. So this is in the introduction. He says, the Gita teaches us that we can become free by giving up not material things, but selfish attachments to material things, and more important, to people. It asks us to renounce not the enjoyment of life, but the clinging to selfish enjoyment at whatever cost to others. It pleads, in a word, for the renunciation of selfishness in thought, word, and action, a theme that is common to all mystics, Western and Eastern alike. Work hard in the world without any selfish attachment, the Gita counsels, and you will purify your consciousness of self-will. In this way, any man or woman can gradually attain freedom from the bondage of selfish conditioning. So I was reading this and recognizing the irony of what I was going through and how attached I was to the fruits of my labor. And, watching my ego do its dance of attachment and desire for personal gain. So I realized that the more I clung to this idea, for example, that this certain group of supporters, the ones who were mostly out of town, I was very anxious about that. And I realized that the more I was clinging to this group of people being there, the more I was actually limiting my audience and limiting the possibility for other people to come. And in fact, my whole intention of the last year or two has been to let go of whatever has been happening before so that I might reach a broader audience. So I could see how that anxiety and that fear and that clinging was actually creating a situation where it was going to disallow something larger and other people discovering my music and coming to this particular show. The more I focused my attention on whatever limited outcomes my little mind might desire, the more I limited other possibilities, greater possibilities, that I couldn't even know or possibly imagine. But most of all, I realized how much I was creating my own misery and suffering, which does not mean somehow I instantly transformed into this other state of mind. But I was grateful to be able to observe it all and to laugh a little bit at the irony of it. So the day came, and I was actually quite nervous. I thought there might be 50 or maybe 60 people there. I was doing all I could to prepare for this and to, become the vessel and let go of it all. But it's not easy knowing that you might be performing to an empty, kind of empty-ish looking room. But still, I sent up my prayers, took a deep breath, and asked that I might be a vessel, that I might just really turn myself over to the music and to my art and to God. But as I was getting ready to go on stage, I was still battling those demons. They were still very active in my mind. Much to my surprise, when I stepped out, the room was full. There weren't 150 people there, but there were over 100, and it looked very full. And they were extremely receptive. There were so many people there that I actually didn't see everybody. Of course, I play with my eyes closed a lot of the time, which you guys know. But I was also talking a lot in between and looking around. And afterwards, there were people that wrote me that said, "Loved your show." I was like, "Oh, were you there?" So there were a lot of people in that room. And my mom, who's actually been to many, many shows, she has been going to, musical theater and classical concerts, folk concerts her whole life, many times a week, dragging us all there for years and years and years and years. She said she'd never seen a more supportive audience. So in fact, all my prayers were answered. I was a little nervous starting out. Oh, I forgot to mention too that the day before my dress rehearsal, things were not going so well. Probably induced by my anxieties, because prior to that, they'd been going better. But I was doing some new things technically. I have these soundtracks that go with my music, the new music, and a lot of the music on the CD was improvised. So it means I have to go back and learn the music, because I was improvising when we were recording. So now I have to go back and learn it so that I can play it with these soundtracks, and it's on my phone, and so it's a technical issue, making all of that work. And I discovered that if you, even if you put your phone on silent when it's hooked up like that, if you don't have it on airplane mode, calls will still come through. Something that didn't happen during the concert, it happened during rehearsal, thankfully. And then I was like, So, there's just a lot of things for me to be keeping in mind while I was there. But within a short amount of time, luckily the one song that was causing the most problem was at the top of the program, and it went great. And then after that was done, I realized I wasn't nervous anymore, and I really was able to just enter into the music and be there, totally present, totally with everybody, totally with my music, and just offer the best of myself. And I had a blast. And we had a wonderful reception afterwards, and really there was just a lot of joy and light and laughter the whole afternoon. Everything was perfect. And my 2 daughters were there from out of town, which made it, the cherry on top. It was perfect. So the lessons of all of this were not lost on me. The big lesson that I realized was that, my awareness that I was creating my own suffering was very, very much true. That was totally validated. And I also realized that no matter what the, apparent indicators were, it really didn't tell me what the outcome was going to be. So it's a waste of our time to be fretting over the outcomes when in fact we have no way of knowing or controlling any given outcome. We don't know what's going to happen. But it's ours to give the best that we can to whatever work that we're doing, whether we're street sweeping or teaching or an artist or the president. All we can do is give our very best with our whole heart, dedicating our work to something higher, whether we call it God or our higher power or whatever it is. And then letting go of the fruits of that labor. And that is why the Gita counsels the fruits of the labor are not ours. Ours is just to do the work and to turn all the rest over and to do the work in service. So I loved this lesson, and I loved how long it was. It was over many, many, many months. And then it culminated in this one day and showed me once again the real truth of this matter. So the Gita says, I'm referring to it again, it was kind of my main guide for today. You have the right to work, but never to the fruit of work. You should never engage in action for the sake of reward, nor should you long for inaction. Perform work in this world as a man established within himself. He's speaking, actually, this is Krishna speaking to Arjuna, so that's why the masculine. Without selfish attachments, alike in success and defeat, for yoga is perfect evenness of mind. And I asked somebody once, someone who, he's actually the president of the Vaishnavist temple in Denver now, but he's a brilliant, pretty young man, just brilliant, brilliant teacher, and very knowledgeable, not just about the Bhagavad Gita, but many world spiritual traditions. And I asked him once, well, what do you think about wealth? Because many spiritual paths, speak out about simplicity and about not being attached to riches and letting go of your riches. So what do you think about it? And what are we to do about that? We have to eat, right? We have to earn a living. And he said, actually, it's not about not being rich or being poor. It's about not being attached to wealth or attached to poverty. If income comes to you, if riches come to you, then you let them come with an even mind, and you do good with them. If they are taken away, you continue to do good as best as you are able, and to keep an even mind. So it's really about keeping an even mind, regardless of what happens in the material world. So we don't struggle against either wealth or poverty. And then it goes on to say, the Gita goes on to say, just a little bit after this last passage, those who surrender all selfish attachments are like the leaf of a lotus floating clean and dry in water. Sin cannot touch them. Sin, which means actually missing the mark. And then it says, for those who have ascended to yoga, the path is stillness and peace. So yoga actually means finding this complete, peaceful, even mind, so that we're not buffeted about by all the things that are happening around us in the material world. What allows this to be possible is knowing completely that we are not our actions nor our thoughts. The essence of who we are is rather the self with a capital S, the essential, stable, unchanging source that is also God, the divinity that is within us. When we are so completely identified with this, with God, then everything that happens in the material world no longer has power over us, and we step into this immense, amazing power that is the divinity within us. We remain calm in our center and continue to offer the very best of ourselves to the world, whether we are faced with success or defeat. This is why meditation is so often recommended on the spiritual journey. This is the training ground. It is here that we learn to free the mind of attachment to thought, worry, doubt, all the constructs that sap our inner power and light, that veil our true divinity. So when I was working on this talk, I thought of something, a project that some friends of mine are working on. Actually, a couple of teachers, K through 12 teachers, have developed this project called the Inner Essence Project. They've identified 5 what they call stop behaviors. I know Ron is like perked up there. The 2 of the teachers here in the front. They've identified 4 stop behaviors and 5 laws of life. And they're trying to teach children to identify these stop behaviors and then replace them with one of the laws of life. So the stop behaviors are checking, making, wanting, and holding. So checking means like constantly checking ourselves and other people to make sure they're doing it right. So a kindergartner, for example, this might be when they're drawing, they're worried that their drawing doesn't look like everybody else's. A teenager, it might be, do they look right? So they're going to fit in with their peers. Is their mom acting okay in public and not embarrassing them? Following the proper rules. For an adult, it might be, am I speaking exactly properly to my daughter so that I don't cause any problems between us? Whatever. It's constantly doing this all the time. I think the other ones are a little bit more more clear. So making, just forcing things to happen, being very attached to the results, wanting, desiring things that maybe aren't happening right now in our life. And holding is kind of the opposite of that, clinging to what is right now, because everything is going to come and go. And then the laws of life are possibility, the law of intent, the law of choice, the law of giving, and the law of trust. So very similar to unity values. And she gave us this wonderful example. They were working with some kindergartners. And one day, they'd all been through this training, and one day, one of the little kids wanted to be at the front of some line or other, and he's arguing with all the rest of them, pushing them out of the way, and they're all, scuffling about and arguing with each other about who's going to be first in line. And another little kid piped up and said, "Hey, you're wanting." And so the other kid is like, "Oh, okay." And they got together and they're like, "What could we replace this with? Which of those laws could we replace it with?" And they decided to replace it with giving. So suddenly now, they're all like, "Hey, you be first in line. Hey, you want to be first in line?" And it became this joyous, fun game. Isn't that amazing? So just think if we were implementing that in all of our schools and teaching children from the time they were little, then by the time we were adults, everybody would be in this mode. It's like, "Oh, right now I am clinging." What can I replace that with? Trust. Right, so it's amazing. So letting go of these stop behaviors and believing in the laws of life is really an expression of faith, and acknowledges the original blessing that is so refreshingly acknowledged in Hinduism as well as in unity, that our innate goodness, our sense of knowing that we are divine, is the core of everything, including our individual personalities, which means that no one needs to acquire goodness and compassion. They are already there. All that is necessary is to remove the selfish habits that hide them. So there's a lot of focus in the Bhagavad Gita and all religions, certainly it was Jesus' primary message, on love. That if we really deeply love ourselves and our neighbors as ourselves, that there is no way we can cause harm. Once we see ourselves in everybody else and everybody else in us, that is that divine connection. And then we just aren't capable, really, of causing harm to anyone. So St. Augustine, this wonderful Christian mystic, said, "Love, and then do as you like, because you really can't harm anybody anymore." And back to Eknath Easwaran's introduction, he says, "This is not running away from life, as is so often claimed. It is running into life, open-handed and open-minded. Flying, running, and rejoicing," said the Catholic scholar Thomas à Kempis, "for he is free and will not be bound, will never be entangled in self-doubt, conflict, or vacillation. In that unification, we can see not the extension of personality, but its full blossoming. This is what it means to be fully human, leaving behind our ordinary lives of stimulus and response, getting and spending, and discover all that a spiritual life can be, active, joyful, intentional, a middle path between extremes that transfigures everyday living." So that reminded me so much of the daily word reading. It's all about that same thing, stepping into this other way of living that allows us this immense freedom. So I want to close with a little experience that I had, a story about awareness, about past mistakes. I put mistakes in quotes. So sometimes I need 8 hours of sleep. I'm not one of those people who can do less. But sometimes I wake up very early, like 4 or 5 in the morning, and I'm not very good at getting to bed very early at night. And I have trouble falling back to sleep. So I've kind of gotten in this habit of when I wake up that early, I'll just get up and do my morning routine, which is have a glass of water, go outside and do my yoga, come inside, take a shower, and then meditate. So I just do that at 4 in the morning or whatever time it is. Not every day, but when I wake up like that and I'm not falling back asleep. So, and then I'll go back to bed and get however much other sleep I needed, the remaining 2 hours or whatever. And sometimes that's the best sleep ever. So I guess there was another, I think in the Middle Ages, sometimes they had something called second sleep. So somebody told me it was similar to that. But I would recommend it. It's really, really pretty nice. And I also get to tap into that early morning, auspicious hour for meditation. So this was one of those days. And I'd been reading, as I told you, the Bhagavad Gita. And that day there was a little piece that jumped out at me, just a few words, that said, "Be fearless and pure. Give freely." Which really sums it all up. Let go of all of your fears. Purify yourself by letting go of all selfish desires, and then give of yourself freely to the world in whatever way you do. So as I drifted back to sleep, my mind, as it so often does, wandered back to my worries. And I started thinking about this one particular mistake that I have been perceiving as a mistake anyway for quite some years, something that actually has been quite costly in many, many ways in my life. But suddenly something happened. Really, it was like a physical thing that happened to me. I felt this like dawning happening, and I felt like I was being filled with light, and this awareness came to me. It was a very physical experience. This awareness came to me that that perceived mistake didn't matter at all. And the reason it didn't matter is because it didn't change my intrinsic value as a human being. Even if it actually was a mistake, it didn't change who I was at my core, my value in the eyes of God, my own inner divinity. So inherent in this awareness was the awareness that that is true of all my perceived mistakes. And it was a real moment, I'm telling you. I realized, oh my gosh, no matter what I have done in my life up to this moment, it doesn't matter. I can let go of all of that worry and all of that suffering I've been creating for myself, because that doesn't change who I am at my core. And this is true of all of us. When we do this, this will free us to be truly fearless and pure, to give freely, to step into the power of letting go. Learn to let go. That is the key to happiness. And so it is.